Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. It is season 4, and we are on episode
Seven.
Seven. I'm David James, the property training manager here at CNC. This handsome devil next to me is Murphy Bucks. And also we have joining us today is James Thompson with Knight Solutions. James, there you are. So we're excited. Yes, sir. We're excited about today. Discussion today is about repair versus replace to shingled roofing systems.
Yep.
Also the use of a roof snake.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to see. So we sat down recently with James and Knight Solutions and their team for this roundtable. Those are involved, as you'll see in the pre-recorded session, is of course James himself. He's the sales and marketing director. We've got Ryan Wilson, training and development director, and then Isaac Wilson, who's over the field operations. I believe he's the director for the field operations. So they're going to. It's a round table. They're going to sit down and talk about things that come into play, things that come up when we're looking at a repair versus replace decision, which seems to never, I don't think it's ever going to go away, right?
No, I don't think it will either. No,
it's always going to be up for discussion. So that's what we're looking at. We'll turn it over to Murphy. You got anything to add? Did I miss anything?
No, we actually won't be showing any reptiles, though. It'll just be a roof snake. You'll see the tool. I did want to mention, though, we've got a carrier-specific training coming up. It's a field adjuster recruitment event from June 2nd through the 4th. So that's coming up. Obviously, register now. Give a call to HR and get on that list. It's a great opportunity for all who's interested. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump right into it. And just want to thank Knights again for helping us out with this.
Right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Claims Corner. Thanks for joining us again. Today's episode is centered around repair versus replace to shingle roofing systems. This is and has always been a topic for discussion. I don't think that it'll ever be clear cut, just due to the number of factors that come into play when we're out there working these claims or looking at these homes. We all know that each claim stands on its own merit and facts, so I'm excited to dive into this one. Again, I'm David James, the property manager, training manager here at CNC. Here with us today is James Thompson, Ryan Wilson, Isaac Wilkins, I keep saying that wrong, of Knight Solutions. They're going to help us elaborate on this topic. James, I'll turn it over to you just to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having us, first of all. James Thompson, Sales and Marketing Director with Knight Solutions, going into my 7th year in this industry with Knight Solutions. Glad to be here today.
Glad to have you.
I'm Ryan Wilson. I'm the Training Director for Knight Solutions. I've been with them for about 2 years now.
Okay.
And I'm Isaac Wilkins, Director of Operations, 2 years with Knights.
Okay. Like I said, we've already done one episode and it was great as far as the topic goes. It's kind of feed off of this one. So again, going to the repair versus replace on shingle roofing systems. So really, just to start it off, when we get on the roof, when you're out there inspecting, how are you identifying the shingle types? How do you, when you get up there and you start your assessment?
Right. Always one of the very first starting points for an inspection on a roofing system. Just to we talked about this in the other episode, but just to bring people back up to speed again, why this is so relevant. Like you said, this is always going to be an argument within the insurance industry. Repair versus replace, never going to go away. This debate's going to go on till the end of time.
Right.
Before you get up on a roofing system, obviously the first thing we're going to do to try to identify what type of shingle that we're looking at is the use of a shingle gauge. We bring up that picture of the shingle gauge, show how that's used by a ladder assist technician on the inspection. But this is just the start of identifying that specific shingle type and manufacturer coloring, all that stuff comes into play as well.
Yeah.
So the shingle type there, that obviously lets us know that that's a 30-year laminated shingle, also known as architectural, sometimes referred to as 3-dimensional shingle as well. That's just a very basic shingle type, and much more information can be gathered by other pieces of key information as well.
So I got a couple things when we have this up here.
Yeah.
Sadly enough, sometimes, from a file review standpoint, manager standpoint, or from the claim side of it, when we're looking at inspections, photos, and documentation, we see, or someone may find that the wrong side of the gauge is being used.
Yeah, and that's
Is
something. It happens sometimes. That's something that
Okay.
we routinely. I shouldn't say routinely, but sometimes have to coach our technicians on as well. Make sure
Yeah.
the gauge is correctly oriented on that shingle when you're taking a photo of it.
Right.
So that particular type of shingle gauge would identify 30, 35, 40, 50-year laminates.
Pull that back up for us, Jeremiah.
And then on the other side of the shingle gauge would deal with 3 tabs. And then also on the other side, you actually have the top and the bottom of the shingle gauge, which would deal with asphalt composition shingles or organic, right? Because the thickness of asphalt composition shingles versus organic is going to be different. So again, making sure your gauge is correctly oriented
Yeah.
is very important for adjusters, file reviewers, everybody that's looking at your inspection report.
Right. So help us understand. We may see the gauge slid directly into the middle of the shingle versus on the corner of the shingle. What's the difference? Why do we see some, going straight up in that direction and others at an angle?
I mean, this is actually a photo that I produced during a ground
Okay.
inspection there. So the way I have it oriented on there, I'm sure there's going to be some people that may say that's incorrectly applied there.
Yeah.
To get that photo, that information, you have to unseal the corner of the shingle right there. I don't want to potentially possibly cause any damage to that shingle at all. So I'm very cautious about unsealing it more than I have to. One thing that you do kind of have to take into account when you are orienting the shingle gauge that way is to make sure that you're not getting an inaccurate reading due to the cohesive seal, the sealant on the bottom of that shingle, right? That adheres it to the starter course, right? So, before I actually even put the shingle gauge on there, I'm kind of reaching underneath of it, making sure there's not a big lump of cohesive seal right there in the area where I'm trying to apply my
You won't
gauge.
get a true reading of it.
Exactly.
I got you.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Now, 3 tabs, they work a little bit differently. Usually right at the eave, I can almost always find a single tab that's already completely unsealed.
Yeah.
And most of the times on 3 tabs, I would put my shingle gauge on from the side rather than, from the front like this, right? Now, laminate shingles are a little bit different. They're not individual 3 tabs per shingle, right? It's all one solid sheet, and it's got that laminate portion on top. It's a little stiff, it's a little bit harder to manipulate, bend. Don't always want to come at it from the side because, again, if I have to unseal too much of the shingle, I'm risking causing damage to it. Things of that nature. Now, and by the same token, again, that shingle gauge kind of at a little bit of an angle there on the corner. If I go straight at it, right, that shingle gauge itself is actually like 3/4 of an inch, an inch tall.
Right.
So if I'm trying to get that true reading, trying to get the gauge all the way, the shingle all the way up into the gauge, I risk potentially taking that top corner of the gauge and maybe poking it through the shingle.
So
Right.
generally, if the shingle's not sealed, if the shingle's sealed, we don't want to unseal it at all, right? What we'll do is we'll go to other portions of the roof, like around a pipe boot, where the flange is overlapped by a shingle. Some installers will seal those down, and you're just running out of options.
Sometimes you can go to a rake edge.
But yeah, a rake shingle, a valley shingle.
Right.
By and large, 90-something% of roofs are going to have an unsealed shingle somewhere on it. So if you haven't found it from either the eave or a pipe, flange, or a penetration in the roof, then remember it. And as you're doing your inspection of the roof, look for that unsealed shingle.
Right.
Usually in a corner tab if it's a 3-tab shingle, or in diagonal unsealed laps.
Right.
Right.
So when you say remember it, and we don't have to get off into that topic, but you guys have a checklist or something that you make sure
Well,
you're checking all
once
the
you
boxes to make
do
sure you don't
inspections
forget.
day in, day out, you
Yeah.
have a process and a portion of your whatever phase of that process you normally do your shingle gauge.
Right.
If you forget
It's
it,
just a routine.
or if you don't do it right, then you're liable to forget it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we always try to do it right at the point of access from our ladder.
Yeah.
But again, if I don't have a good situation, I don't want to risk causing damage to
Mhm.
shingle. So I may gather some other pieces of information right at the eve. I may actually continue on with access of the roof and then find a different area throughout the roof where I can apply my shingle gauge accurately without causing damage, making sure I'm still capturing that information.
best way to not forget it is just to hold it the whole time until you do it.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're on the roof, we've identified the shingle. Anything else that may come into play as far as,
So the gauge itself is really just kind of the first step, rudimentary part of identifying what type of shingle it is, but it can go far beyond that. We actually have a process now where we use iTel mobile apps on our phones
yeah,
to help us more accurately narrow down who the manufacturer of that shingle is, what type of coloring it is, right?
Yeah.
Because again, this debate's never going away: repair versus replace.
right.
So the adjuster needs to know exactly what type of shingle that is, a little bit more than just what the gauge is telling you, a little bit more than just a 30-year laminate shingle, right? Because if they are going to potentially write an estimate for repair, they need to make sure that that shingle is still available, right?
Right.
Because if
Right.
it's not, then it turns into a whole nother discussion altogether about replacing the entire roof.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's just a couple of key pieces of information you would want to gather in order for iTel to be able to accurately identify manufacturing, color specs, all that good stuff. You want to measure the length of the shingle. Not
Mhm.
every single shingle is the same length, right? You also want to measure the exposure of that shingle. Because in minimum damage situations, talking about maybe just 1, 2, 3 shingles, single shingle damage shingle pull out, and then single shingle insert as a repair.
Say that again, faster 3 times in a row.
Single
I'm just
shingle
kidding.
extraction and then single shingle insert as a repair, right?
Yeah.
Need to make sure that it fits. Obviously, you need to make sure it's same type. What's the actual wording? Like, kind, and quality.
There you go.
I believe is the statute that we have in my home state of Kentucky.
Yeah.
When it comes to matching.
Sure, that's not Texas.
It's not Texas.
Okay.
I don't know. There may be a statute in Texas, but I'm only familiar with my home state statutes, and I know that they wrote that language in there very, very specifically, like, kind, and quality.
Right.
Maybe it doesn't always have to be the exact shingle match, but that's just for Kentucky. I can't speak for every other state.
Right. And I'm not going to either. If it's not like kind of quality, is similar construction.
Right.
Verbiage is what's used.
Have you ever heard of an English cut shingle? This is something I've only experienced maybe twice in my 7 years of doing this. But there's an architectural shingle they call an English cut that's just slightly shorter lengthwise than every other normal architectural shingle that you see out there on the open market. And so the problem you run into is if an adjuster doesn't know this information, right, and they write a repair estimate, and then a contractor comes out trying to do a repair with just a standard, same color architectural shingle that they picked up at Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't fit back into the slot where you pull out a damaged shingle. The normal architectural shingles are actually going to be inch or so longer, half inch.
Yeah.
It's a very small discrepancy at normal, site. You first lay eyes on it.
Yeah.
You don't even know it unless you actually take the time to measure it. Yeah.
So getting into that, I know we had talked about measurements as far as 3-tab and laminate. There is a difference
Yes.
between those.
Yeah.
It's easy to measure a 3-tab, right? Because
Yeah.
the tabs are 12 inches.
Should be.
Should be.
Just about everyone I think I've ever dealt with is, but not going to say that every 3-tab again is the exact same length. Some
Yeah.
manufacturers are producing things that are maybe
Sure.
a quarter inch longer or shorter or what have you.
Right.
So correctly identifying it for the adjuster, that's a big part of what we do as a ladder assist technician, trying to give them as much information as possible in their quest to decide, should I write a repair estimate or should I write an estimate to replace this whole roof?
Yeah.
Lots of other factors come into play. Of course, we're just now touching on shingle identification. That's the first step.
Right. And another thing I like, and we partnered in the past on different topics, going back to the gauge. Can you pull that gauge back up again? Is what I saw you use in one of the assessments, but I don't know that everybody does, is what's on the bottom side of that where it says laminate, what's underneath that?
Oh yeah, the D-ring.
Yeah.
Keeping that attached to my tool belt at all times.
Talking about the measurements,
And the ruler.
the
Oh,
ruler.
you're talking about the scale.
Yeah.
I absolutely utilize that during my inspections. Usually comes into play for hail claims more than anything else.
Right.
But yeah.
And that helps you identify, when you're looking at the bruises and different things, what type of damage we have or the size of the hailstone and so forth. That's just added. I shouldn't say added. That's just additional.
It's value added
Yeah.
to our inspection report, right? I never, the notes and annotations in my reports when I take a photo like that, it simply just says scale. That's
Mhm.
it. That's all I'm trying to provide to the adjuster
Right.
is helping them understand the scale. Like spatter marks, that's really what I use it for more than anything.
Right.
The removal of oxidation on heavily oxidized surface, right?
Right.
To say, yes, there's definitely evidence to back up hail's been in this area. So when I
Mhm.
take a picture of a spatter mark, I'm definitely trying to provide them scale so they can better understand the
Something.
size of that hail.
Right. So we got the pitch gauge, the shingle gauge, the pitch gauge, obviously the leading into the roof condition, shingle condition. Got the steepness of the slope or the roof.
Right.
Other things that come into play, the direction, which slope is facing south or the most or the west or whichever. Where does
Yep.
the sun set? The west. Yeah. So
Definitely always
mean-
trying to identify that stuff in my report.
Mhm.
Our process is pretty standard, quantifying the damage per directional slope.
Yeah.
And that's strictly just the inspection photos themselves. How many damaged shingles on the front slope? Where is it located? But we go a step further than that. After an inspection is done, we provide a sketch.
Mhm.
And one thing that adjusters really love about our service is that we illustrate where we see the damage
Yeah.
on the roofing system. In a full picture, a sketch itself, mark it up where you actually saw the damage. Inspection photos themselves, and I mean, a really good technician can illustrate where the damage is, every single damaged shingle in
Right.
their photos. But in a situation where you have lots of damage, sometimes it's hard to pinpoint in your actual inspection photos exactly where every shingle is located.
Right.
But the sketch as a whole shows you the entire roofing system, shows you where all the damage was located per facet, gives them information at their fingertips, a
Yeah.
snapshot of where all damage was located. Because again, back in the home state of Kentucky, matching and line of sight definitely comes into play in this debate every single day.
Yeah. I know that you talked about Illustrate and Ryan Knight. I know that's one of his biggest things is
Oh,
being
yes.
able to paint the picture, I guess, and give the overall picture of what's going on. As far as other conditions, I mean, we get on the roof and what else do you run across? What are we taking into account as far as, I mean, the brittleness test, is that even a thing still to this day, or does that come into play, or how does that
Yeah, absolutely. Brittleness test does come into play. We've actually got some photos of a brittleness test I performed on an inspection.
Mhm.
Now, this is it's different for every carrier, right? There are
Yeah.
some insurance companies that will recognize the efficacy of a brittleness test, and others that either don't recognize the efficacy or they just don't want us to do it because it can be considered potentially causing damage to
Mhm.
another shingle that isn't already damaged. So first and foremost, let's make it very clear that this is only done strictly at the discretion of the acting adjuster.
Yeah.
Right. If they, we do an inspection, we come off the roof, we discuss it with them, and it happens to be, a minimal damage situation, or it's somewhere in the gray scale where they know they're going to have to, make a decision. Which way do I go with this? Is this a repair estimate or do I buy the whole roof? And if they feel like they're in that gray scale and they need some extra information to figure out whether they want to repair or replace it, they'll ask us to do this. So that picture right there is me performing a brittleness test. This is an architectural shingle. Absolutely had approval from the adjuster. A couple of potential wind damage shingles marked below there. Always want to do my brittleness test above a damaged shingle. So break the seal on that. Flex it at an approximate 45-degree angle to take this picture really well. I actually use my tape measure, stick in there, hold it up while I'm doing that.
Yeah.
During this particular test, this wasn't too long ago. I remember this roof. I had this gauged at about 14 to 18 years of age. So at first glance, condition of this roof was not that bad at all. But when I did this, you see the laminate portion of the shingle, the top layer of that shingle, right where my tape measure is stuck in there. It started to buckle and bend a little bit. Because just by nature, architectural shingles, 2 layers, they're kind of stiff, right? So whenever I lifted it up and flexed it, it started to crack a little bit. That laminate portion did. Go on to the next photo. The next photo is me removing the tape measure and then laying the shingle back down in its position.
While we're getting to that, well, there it is right there.
Yeah, right there. And see, even this photo right here, to the untrained eye, right? You're looking at that and you're like, what kind of damage did that cause at all? I don't see anything, right? But go on to the next one where I get a little bit more up close and personal, right? The reason I failed this brittleness test is, again, because of that laminate portion. That's not the up close one, is it? Did I give you another up close one? Really hard to pick off, but that laminate portion, it did start to crack. To somebody that really knows what they're talking about and's got a trained eye, you can see it in that photo. But I thought I took a very up close and personal photo of that, and I knew that's information the adjuster was very much going to want to see.
One of the conditions, if you look at right below the BT there, you see that little the one below it, that piece that's on the corner.
Yep.
That's often. Is it wind damage or not?
Right. That's obviously part of the debate. Now, notice whenever I said this a while ago, I had a couple of shingles marked below there as possible wind damage, right? So for me, that's not exactly black and white, whether that was wind damage or not. But as a ladder assist technician, very important to note, I don't make that final determination about whether it's considered damage or not. I provide the adjuster with as much information as possible and let them make their own educated decision about it.
Right.
Okay. Another important thing to note, go back to the photo with the tape measure stuck in there. Another important thing to note about a brittleness test in general. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people that watch this and maybe don't agree with the parameters, the process of how we actually perform a brittleness test. There's a lot of contractors out there that would tell you that needs to be flexed at a much harder angle in order to actually remove a shingle and then replace it, right? So we do our brittleness test per the guidelines of the insurance company that we're doing a scope for, an inspection for, okay? And I said approximate 45 degrees. I mean, that might not be an actual 45 degrees, but it's close. It's simulating a possible repair. Again, contractors are going to tell you got to pull that up a whole lot more to be able to get the nails out. There are specific tools out there that allow you to remove the fasteners, remove a damaged shingle, put a new shingle back in its place without having, to manipulate shingles too far. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, contractor side of the fence, they're definitely going to tell you they got to do a lot more. To be perfectly honest, my personal opinion, professional opinion, is that a shingle really doesn't even have to be manipulated that far in order to get the fasteners out, pull a damaged shingle out, and then put a new one back in.
Yeah.
So we try to be kind of middle of the road. I'm definitely not trying to flex it at a hard 90 degrees. I'm also not trying to do a brittleness test with the shingle only raised this far and say that that's adequate, right? Because that's obviously not adequate. Trying to be somewhere in the middle ground, trying to be, in line with our carrier's processes and guidelines and still document it as well as possible.
So, I'd say 6 inches is for the longest time, what was out there as far as the brittleness test goes. It needs to be at least 6 inches, but that's not necessarily the case, like what you just described and what you just talked about. So
I think the biggest takeaway looking at this is what did you age this shingle at?
I had this roofing system gauged at I think I said 14 to 18 years.
Which, if you think about it, we're looking at a 30-year product.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's so many factors that go into this debate. And one of them being the weather that can have an effect on premature aging of
Yeah.
a product. There could be a lack of ventilation that could cause a shingle to fail prematurely like this. But yeah, just touching on the fact that the shingle did potentially fail before the end of its life,
Right.
is interesting.
Yeah, it's so much that plays into that. I'm glad you brought that up because I was gonna ask you how can you just say, how do you know that's 14 to 16 or 18 years based on your
Well,
experience?
So I mean, in my inspections, the only time I would ever narrow it down, pin it down, and say, "Oop, this roof is 15 years old." Only time I would ever do that is if the insured can clearly say, "Yes, I remember this roof being put on in 2005, 6, whatever,
Right.
whatever the year may have been." Other than that,
And the roof match it.
right,
Yeah.
and it looked legit, and I believe what they're saying. I take it for face value.
Mhm.
It doesn't, obviously they're not trying to blow smoke.
Right.
Now, other than that, if they can't give me a hard definitive date or pin it down, I'm always going to give a range, right?
Yeah.
And that's based on, again, multiple factors: overall condition,
Right.
color fading.
Right.
Definitely looking at north-facing slopes to get the least amount of sun, weathering, exposure, UV exposure, all that good stuff.
Right.
Taking a multitude of things into account.
Right.
The bottom of the shingle.
Yeah, the butt edges of the shingles,
Help me out with the term. I'm trying to think of it.
stagnation region.
Yes, the stagnation region shows where it's kind of creeping up the shingle from the bottom.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what
What is the measurement, like a 1/16 of an inch
It's
per
a very,
every
yeah, it's a very
like
small scale.
5 years?
I think so.
So when you've got about a 3/8 of an inch, what appears like granulose at the eave of the shingle, essentially at the bottom of each shingle tab,
Yeah.
that could be figured at about 15 years, roughly speaking. But
Right.
with everything else during an inspection, you're comparing and building the whole story in your head before making any determination, taking an objective approach to, does this match what it looked like over here? And
Right.
what's going on the ground? Is the house 5 years old, but the roof looks 20?
Right. Right. That's what I was going to bring up as well is, any type of collateral come into play as far as
When it comes to age,
Or when it comes
no,
to
just-
determining
just
repair
the
versus
repair
replace.
versus replace. I mean, if you're on the fence about if it's storm damage or not, it really doesn't come into repair versus replace. Is there any other supporting
can.
evidence?
It really can.
and-
I've actually had a couple of instances like that before. Hail
Mhm.
damage claims. I maybe see some light collateral to some box vents or something, but not assessing hail damage to the shingles themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, no names, no identification. But I know roofs have been bought. Entire roofing systems have been bought off of that.
Mhm.
The contractor will make. I'm not going to say valid or non-valid argument, but if you have legitimate hail damage to some appurtenances, to the box vents, to some rain caps, stuff like that, in
Mhm.
order to actually remove them and replace them, put the property back to pre-loss condition.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to manipulate shingles. You got to remove some shingles. And then again, age, condition, brittleness, all that stuff does come into play for the
Right.
adjuster to determine how do I handle this accordingly.
Put it back in pre-loss
Yes,
condition.
there is
Yes.
unique scenarios. I have inspected windstorm claims where the front experienced wind damage.
Yeah.
And then specifically, I remember a tree had also fallen and impacted the chimney and the chimney flashing on
Mhm.
the rear. But there was no wind damage shingles to the rear. But because they had to manipulate that chimney flashing, they had to manipulate the shingles as well as around that,
Right.
which bumped it into,
Pushed
replace.
it over the threshold. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that's what so that's what I was getting to. So yeah, that was
What threshold are you talking about?
what threshold?
You said bumped it into that threshold.
Well, every carrier has their own guidelines. Their I want to say requirements, but the way they want their claims handled. So I mean, that could be, you may run into that as far as X amount of shingles that are damaged. Is it feasible? Is a repair or replace, more feasible than trying to repair it?
Yeah.
Right.
It's so
So-
dynamic, when it comes for an adjuster standpoint on that topic. But But like kind of what James was saying, you have to spend your due diligence finding every single anomaly on the roofing system, identifying all of the potential granule loss that could affect the brittleness. Yeah.
And sometimes we even in a grayscale claim where you feel like a brittleness test may be a critical piece of information for them, we'll forego the brittleness test because maybe there's already a prior repair on this roof. I just had one not too long ago. 100 square roof. First of all, it was massive, and I would say that this would have been in the grayscale because I think we were talking about 20 shingles or less on the entire roofing system of 100 squares, right? And there was a prior repair on this roof, and all around that prior repair, there's a whole lot of what we would refer to as damage on repair.
Yeah.
So all of the shingles that belonged to the original roofing system that had been manipulated, had been flexed, they had been creased, they had experienced granule loss all around that area of repair. I took a couple pictures of that. I documented it very well. And that was a situation where the adjuster's like, yep, we're not even going to bother with a BT, right? Like that's enough information for me to make the judgment that I need to make. Right. That's not always the case, but just that one particular circumstance.
I mean, it's pretty much the plea from every homeowner anytime there's a claim, right? They don't want their roof patched.
Right.
Nobody wants a patch job, partly because of aesthetics, and then partly because they just don't feel like that's going to be up to par. It's not unreasonable, particularly addressing that specifically, but at the same time, it's just not how every claim is going to work. Right. You have a couple damaged shingles isn't necessarily going to constitute a full replacement for you.
Right.
Yeah, as you said in the very beginning, each individual claim, each individual property, each individual roofing system has to be judged on its own merits. And there's a whole lot of variables that come into play. So even though it looks like this is just rinse and repeat over and over and over for us as inspectors day in and day out, every one of them, every single inspection is a little bit different.
We often refer to scenarios or examples for shingle conditions.
Analogies.
Analogies with tires, right? If you get a nail in one tire, do you replace that tire? Well, it depends on where the nail is, right? Or specifically, your tire engineers will tell you that for sure. But you're not going to replace the whole set. So that's the kind of the thing when it comes to repair versus replace on a roof, even if it is a covered or not covered damage. Is it necessary to replace the whole set of shingles on your roof? Or is there a reasonable, feasible way to repair it and it still be just as good as it was before?
Right.
AKA pre-loss condition. So that's the analogy that we like to use sometimes when trying to explain that, if we ever have to.
And this is where, again, inspection techniques, as technicians out there, this is where condition and as much information as possible in our reports really comes into play. Let's get some of those shingle condition photos up. So, I mean, some people will look at these condition photos and they're not seeing maybe what they want or what they need from an adjuster standpoint. This one right here, granule loss. Now, I mean, does that warrant coverage from an insurance adjuster at all? Maybe not, but it is something we observe on the roof, and it can play a factor in an adjuster's decision making, coverage determination, right? What about the nail pops? Right? If they're considering a repair versus replace scenario in a minimum wind damage situation, 10 repairs on a 40 square roof or something like that. But let's say that we observed 50 nail pops throughout this roofing system. So in the adjuster's mind, he or she, they're asking themselves, if I do a minimum repair on this roof, is it going to be in good condition? Right? Am I doing the homeowner a justice? Right, by doing them a repair instead of replacing the entire roof. What about age and deterioration? Just age and deterioration. This is a photo that I like to definitely look for on every single roof. Now, this is nothing to do with storm-related damage at all. I'll tell you where this comes from. Birds and animals, mostly, right? The birds, they love to perch on the ridges, usually right near the rake edges, right? That's where they have the best vantage point. Bird droppings can actually become acidic. They can do severe damage to shingles and or ridge caps, right? But this is an important photo, not because this is storm-related damage, but again, an adjuster debating repair or replace. And if they say, I can repair 10 shingles on this roof, and that puts them back to pre-loss condition. Now, this is not something coverable by their insurance policy, but this can play a role in that adjuster's decision-making process. If I do a repair, they still have, very ugly, bad spots on the roof that they're going to have to contend with. And maybe this leads to interior damage. And maybe just a month down the road, I have another claim on my hands to handle, right? So all of this information can be pertinent, whether it's storm-related damage or not.
Right. I want to touch on that when you said bird droppings. Some people may laugh, but, I've seen to where that's mistaken for hail damage. Same thing with algae or lichen on the roof.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's simply not the case.
Right.
You had me really concerned there for a second. I didn't know where you were going with that. But yeah, the droppings can actually wear off the granules after they sit there for a while, right?
Eat straight through it. Depending on what the animals eat, the droppings can turn acidic.
Yeah, whether it's the acid content, pH level, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Similar to lichen growth getting washed off or knocked off of a roof.
Yeah, the lichen actually feed on ceramic granules. And then eventually once they do die, they'll dry up and they'll actually pop off of the roof and they'll leave behind this very nice circular blemish that is easily mistaken for hail damage all the time. And the bird droppings things, the lichens, had these debates with many contractors on the roof. And I mean, I've been through the training, I've been through HAG certification, and I know it to be true, but a lot of people are just not wanting to hear those types of things. That's damage. That's hail damage. This is stuff you need to cover. This is absolutely, you should pay for this. This is where the debate comes in all the time.
Right. Mm-hmm. And when you're on the fence, what goes back to that as far as your supporting evidence?
Absolutely.
As far as collateral. Okay. If this isn't, bird droppings or lichen or whatever it is, algae, then what's going to support that on that side of the house or around the house?
And those anomalies are so important. Looking at that photo, I think of two things that comes to mind when putting myself in the, place of the adjuster is if you look at that lower slope, you can already see major amounts of discoloration and algae growth. So you got to think about your matching states. Already, we're probably looking at a matching issue. And then secondly, if you look at the shingles just below those ridge cap shingles, you can see the massive amounts of granule loss. So we're probably dealing with a pretty insane brittle shingle. So the second part would be it's probably going to fail a brittle test. Measuring out all your anomalies for a roofing system is pretty important to making that determination whether to replace or repair.
Looking at this picture, to add on to that as well, is it safe to get on that roof with the condition of the shingles? Are you causing more damage by getting on there if they're in this condition?
It's certainly possible. If you're not minding your P's and Q's, if you're not, watching your step, if you're not using your equipment properly, absolutely, that is a thing. Even on non-steep roofs, we absolutely want our guys to be wearing their cougar paw shoes. They got them thick foam pads on the bottom of them.
Right.
Definitely helps us avoid causing more damage to shingles, ridge caps, all that kind of stuff as we're traversing a roofing system during our inspection. Obviously, using our fall protection. This one right here, it's hard to tell from that photo, but I believe that was probably about a 10, an 11, 12 pitch, something like that. So that was definitely accessed with my cougar paws and my fall protection. Definitely minding my P's and Q's to not cause more damage as I'm traversing around. Now, understand that the entire ridge did not look like that. Birds, the way they like to be up there and where they perch constantly, not the entire ridge looks like that, right? That's kind of one end of the spectrum as far as condition is concerned. But again, the reason I document that is because I've taken other condition shots. Let's look at one of those other condition shots kind of in the open field in the middle of my test area. I'm documenting condition throughout an inspection in multiple ways, right? As we do a test square on this photo right here is actually a prior repair with damage on repair. We kind of touched on that earlier.
Yeah.
So noting the condition around that repair, letting the adjuster see that, look, a repair's already taken place, and this is the damage to the original material that has taken place during that repair. Very pertinent information for them. Absolutely, that leads you to believe that if they were to write an estimate for repair again on this roof, this is exactly what would take place on other slopes as they were doing those repairs, right? And then on to condition shot, just a shingle condition right in the middle of a test square. Again, documenting that everywhere throughout the inspection, because the photo on the ridge cap, obviously that's one end of the spectrum. They need to see the other end of the spectrum as well, right? And this is right in the middle of a test square. I would not call that great condition at all. I would probably notate that as fair condition, possibly fair to good. Just depends on which slope it was on, honestly. That right there, I would call fair to good condition. Very minimum granule loss. No blistering. See a couple of small black specks here and there, but those aren't blisters. It's that's just the coloring of the ceramic granules. That condition shot right there, I remember that inspection. That was on a roof with hail damage, and even though maybe I can't pick off any one particular spot in that photo right there that I would call hail damage, we could argue that all day long. But this gives you a general overall idea of the condition throughout the entire slopes, not just focusing on my test area alone, but I want you to know what condition looks like throughout the rest of the slope as well. That definitely helps the adjuster in repair versus replace.
Right. That's man, that's a lot of I wonder if it's reaching the life expectancy or if lack of ventilation on that one there.
So is there any other things in repair versus replace to consider, or questions that we might could hit on before we wrap it up?
No, I think you guys have touched on a lot. We've covered a lot of information. Definitely some takeaways. For me, you have anything you want to add?
I'm sure there's more details we probably could cover, but color variations. I think we had actually talked on that a little bit in a previous episode. How shingles are made and how they withstand the elements. Color variations do come into play. Just slightly different shade of color on a shingle, but not a repair. That stems from same exact shingle maybe coming from a different manufacturing facility than the rest of them did. That can come into play sometimes for the adjusters, but it's certainly not storm related damage, not something coverable by the policy itself.
Right.
Which again, that's the role and responsibility of the adjuster, right? But we as an inspector, as the ladder assist technicians, have to make sure we document it accordingly so they know what they're looking at.
Right.
Because at the glance of an eye, if I'm standing on the sidewalk in front of a house and I see different colored shingles here, there, and there, I might automatically assume as an adjuster that that's a prior repair, right? And if we don't document it well and we don't paint the picture, then they may not know the difference, right? That falls on us as inspectors, as technicians, to document it well, give them the best perspective possible on every single claim.
Right. That's a good way to wrap it up. Isaac, you got anything to?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan?
No, check out the first video if you haven't seen it.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
for sure.
Yeah. James, thank you guys for being here. Lots of stuff to take away. So that's going to do it for this episode. I want to remind you a couple things. Go to our YouTube channel, CNC Catastrophe and National Claims. Like and subscribe. Also, you guys have a YouTube channel.
Absolutely. YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and we're
actually all of it.
We're actually on
There you
TikTok
go.
now as well.
Okay.
Lots of platforms. Subscribe, like us, help us spread the message. Find us on the web at nightsolutions.com.
Right. Awesome. We got all those social media links to it. You guys are fabulous. Thanks for being here. That's it. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for being here.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
See y'all.
All right. Good stuff.
That was really good stuff.
Yeah, I was sitting there trying to take notes again.
I know, I was too.
I was too. Going through it, yeah. James, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
There you go. Thanks again for sitting down with us, you and your group, doing that roundtable, and such a topic to be debated. And, one of the comments that you made, the phrases that you used in there was, it's not a rinse and repeat on every claim. And I couldn't agree more because, it was mentioned several times, every claim stands on its own. There's going to be different factors involved, not alone just the the peril, but you've got the age of the roof, the condition of it, lots of different things that could be going on, and you want to point out. I think Ryan Wilson said to illustrate the damage, or one of you said illustrate the damage. I think all of us, matter of fact, said it. Paint the picture. Let everybody see what's going on, and obviously let the adjuster make that decision. The one thing, another thing that stuck out to me was the brittleness test above a damaged shingle. Why is that? You want to?
Well, I mean,
touch on that a
you're
second?
you're definitely, if you're going to perform a brittleness test, I mean, you're wanting to do it, directly above a damaged shingle that would need to be, removed and replaced. Obviously, you test the shingles above that because that's directly the shingle on the roof that's going to have to be manipulated during a
Mm-hmm.
repair situation. So, you never want to just go to an undamaged area of a roofing system to do a BT, because again, we talked about this in the segment a little bit, but it sometimes can be considered causing damage, right? If it is a very poor condition shingle, you do that brittleness test and it does suffer some, cracking, granule loss, things of that nature, that can be considered causing damage to the shingle.
Right, right, and that's and you answered or you got to the point, or answered what the reason I asked that is because you just want to make sure to remember. Just don't do the brittleness test anywhere in the roof, especially if there's no damage where you're doing it, because now there is if it fails, right?
Yeah, and I know a lot of carriers too, they caution against the brittleness test. And I think a lot of that stems from adjusters maybe not being aware of how to do it. I was glad that video showed how to do it, what's the acceptable angle of lifting that shingle. Because I think so many adjusters just aren't aware, and they think, I'm supposed to just see if this thing will bend in half. And I think that's why carriers shy away from it. But I thought that was a great illustration as to how you do it, why it's important, what it can show you as far as, the repairability, or, hey, do I have to replace this? So,
Yeah, it's very much just a simulation of a repair, right? Not trying to do too little, not trying to do too much, but you're
right.
trying to simulate what would actually occur during a repair process. That's the best information you can possibly provide.
Right.
Absolutely.
One more thing for me it was at the front of it with the shingle gauge in the corner of the shingle, and if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, or not seasoned, maybe, you stick the shingle in the middle of the gauge in the middle of the shingle, and you touched on this, is you're looking at possibly causing damage. You don't want to, I think Isaac said it too, you don't want to unseal any shingles if they're not unsealed. You can walk around the roof and find areas possibly where they're not sealed, and if you do it in the middle, you might have some sealant that comes up and gives you a false, or doesn't give you a true accurate reading, or so forth. So
Right,
that
right.
was a great
Yeah,
point too.
the shingle gauge is just the first step in the material identification, like we talked about in the segment there. But length and exposure, those absolutely help you, determine what that product is, manufacturer, all that good stuff. So shingle gauge is just the start of it.
Mhm.
But yes, absolutely, it needs to be used in a consistent manner and not causing damage to shingles. Again, like the brittleness test, we're not, our goal is to never produce any damage at all. It's just to document and gather information.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right. And going back to that, as far as the topic goes, it's always on a case by case basis, right? You gather all the
Absolutely.
documentation, like you said, present it, and we let the adjuster carrier make that decision. Always want to err on the side of the policyholder, and we're looking for coverage within the guidelines of the policy. So,
That's the pickle. That's the predicament that us as ladder assist technicians, as inspectors, that's the predicament we find ourselves in all the time. Is we got to keep our emotions aside.
Mm-hmm.
It's not our call to make. Right, we're inspecting, we're gathering documentation so the adjuster can have all the supporting information that they need. but I've got to keep my emotions, strictly out of this. I don't make any judgment calls. I don't lean one way or another. If an adjuster is leaning and, he asked me, hey, let's do a BT test because I think I might need to buy this roof instead of doing a repair, I work strictly at his discretion.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we actually did have a couple questions. Most specifically when we talk about roof snakes. Now, granted, for those of you who don't know, it's a tool that you use whenever you're doing a repair to some shingles, so you don't cause further damage to maybe undamaged shingles by that particular peril or loss. But can you use them on slate shingles or cedar shakes, or is it strictly for your architectural and laminate shingles?
I've never personally used it on or seen it used on any other material besides asphalt composition shingles. I think there could be some potential for it to be used on different materials like tiles or maybe some shake shingles. My expertise and my knowledge is in the inspection field, not so much in installation. I have put on a couple of shingled roofs in my time, but I've never done cedar shake, never done any, tile roofing systems. So don't want to say that, I know too much about those installation or repair processes. Basically the gist of the tool is that it makes it so you can put a fastener back in to a shingle, a shake shingle, a tile, whatever, without having to, manipulate the others around it at a point where you're actually going to cause damage. So there may be some capability of using it for other materials, but I'm not going to say I can speak intelligently about that.
Yeah. Another thing is too, so I know this comes a lot into play when you've got a lot of older roofs, whether it's a recall factor or discontinuation of a shingle. Do you typically, as the inspector, make that call and do that research up front, or is that done by the adjuster on the back end after the inspection? How does that work?
Well, it's kind of twofold. Again, here in my home state of Kentucky, there's absolutely some products that we come across pretty frequently that we know are discontinued, not readily available in the open market. If we happen to come across something like that, we generally would indicate that to the adjuster immediately. Say, hey, look, I think this is a shingle you're not going to be able to find, replacements for. But generally speaking, it is up to the adjusters to do their own due diligence, their own research about that exact material. We do our best to gather as much information, enough information for them to properly identify it, right? And that starts with the shingle gauge and the measurements of length and exposure, and making sure we're using our shingle gauge correctly, all that good stuff. So, I mean, if it's something we know for sure, we'll indicate it to the adjuster, but it's up to them to verify, right, the validity of that statement and make sure that it is actually a discontinued shingle. Or if they want to pull an ITEL sample, send it to ITEL laboratories. We can help them with that endeavor also. But at the end of the day, it is up to the adjuster to determine whether that's a discontinued product or not.
All right, gotcha. And we had another question in here too, dipping back into the tile, slate roofing type, type roofing system that you may run into. The question is, are there tests to provide evidence for repair versus replace options for shingles that aren't asphalt shingles? Is there a way to judge or determine the repairability of those?
Not that I'm aware of,
Okay.
right? Slate, tile, whether it's an actual slate tile or, a fake slate tile, right? Made out of fiberglass and some rubber compounds and stuff like that. I'm not aware of any specific tests related to the repairability of other materials like that. I think it's usually based mostly just off of general condition and age. The BT test, it only applies to asphalt composition shingles. That's not a test we would conduct on any other type of material.
Right. Gotcha. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank your crew for doing this for us. It's always good information, a good meeting whenever we partner and put our minds together and talk about things. So I can't thank you enough. I know everybody here at CNC does. You got anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, just expressing my thanks. Thank you guys for giving us the opportunity and the stage. And this level of knowledge and information doesn't come overnight. Doesn't come from just one class, one training session. This is very much an experience based level of knowledge and expertise here. Takes a lot of inspections under your belt, a lot of years doing this kind of stuff to figure all this out and be good at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Can't it's just, you don't want to, you say that, go out and work a hurricane this year and then work another one next year. Let's think about that for a second as far as experience goes and putting those together. So, you got anything? So I know that, again, James, thanks for everything.
Yeah, thank you.
Let everybody know, Isaac and Ryan, we appreciate that. 2 weeks.
Yes.
We're going to have another episode.
Yep. With Eric Moore from EFI Global. Yep.
Yes. He's going to be talking about flooring failures.
Yep, sure is. Yeah, so that'll be in 2 weeks. I know we've partnered with him before and actually taught classes with him at other conferences. He's fantastic. So going to be a really good episode for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
That's all I got, folks. So, see you in 2 weeks. Murphy, you got anything you want to close it out?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks to everybody. Everybody you don't see that has everything to do with the broadcast, thank you to everybody as well. Couldn't do it without you. I always want to make sure we say that, absolutely. So,
All right, good deal. See you guys.
See you, everybody.
2 weeks.
Appreciate your time, guys. Y'all have a good day.
All right,
too.
see you.